it. Sorry, my phone's not switched off. So just to give you a little bit of context of how I initially met Grant, it was quite recently. Grant, you're a producer on a film that's a documentary that's in development just now called Full Circle. And I was handing over some archive footage that I'd filmed about 11 years ago for a show and a documentary I was working on called Wall of Death. And this was going to be possibly featured in the Full Circle documentary that you're producing. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that, please?
Sure, yeah. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here. Nice to meet you all. Thank you, Kim. Full Circle is a feature documentary. It's a co-production between Ireland and Scotland. We have backing from BBC Scotland, from RTE, who are the national broadcaster in Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, the equivalent of the BBC here. We have money from Screen Scotland and also from the Screen Ireland organisation, and there's some tax credit money in there as well. So it's a fully funded feature documentary. It's about the Wall of Death, as Kim said. Just in case anyone doesn't know what a Wall of Death is, it's a sort of fairground attraction where someone rides a motorbike round and round and round a sort of interior circle, really, really fast so they don't fall off the wall. It's extremely dangerous. It's been going for probably around, I don't know, 80 years now, ever since people had motorbikes fast enough to do that. And the film is actually about a Glasgow-based artist called Stephen Skrinker, who is personally really interested in and slightly obsessed with the Wall of Death. He uses the Wall of Death as a kind of artistic metaphor for life. And it's also about his relationship to two Irish guys who built their own Wall of Death in the 1970s in rural Ireland and became kind of local celebrities, and who eventually became the basis of a feature film called Eat the Peach. So the feature documentary we're making now, to some degree, is looking at a film within a film, which, as you may know, is a kind of almost like a sub-genre of documentary format. You quite often see films about films or films about people who were in films. So this is one of these. It's been a long time in development. It's been a long time filming, and COVID shut it down as well. So we've been really delayed, but we are now back up and running, and we're doing some filming at the moment, actually in Glasgow. I don't know if anyone knows the Barclay Curl factory. It's an old marine engineering factory on the Clyde. It's one of those factories right next to one of those huge big cranes on the Clyde, not the one at Finnieston, further up the river. And so we're filming in there because Stephen Skrinker, this Glasgow-based artist, he's hand building his own Wall of Death out of wood, and he's got a motley group of volunteers and people who are helping him do this. So we're filming that right now.
Oh, exciting stuff. Scary. And just to go back a little bit further, I'll put this question to you, Virginia, but like this is a question for both of you, but how you both get involved in the film and TV industry, where it started for you, and also about like Faction North, your company, production company. Just give us a bit of history about from both of you.
Well, I initially wasn't involved in the film and television industry. I actually did a degree in history in New Zealand. I'm from New Zealand. And then when I came to the UK, I decided that I wanted to get involved in film, because I always had a love of film, because my father used to take me to the 5 o'clock pictures every Saturday night. That was his idea of childcare. I had this passion for cinema, but I'd never thought that it would be possible to actually make it into a career. But when I came to London, I did a Saturday course, and then I decided to apply to St. Martin's School of Art, and I did a postgraduate diploma there. And then because I couldn't really go straight into directing, I decided to become an editor. So I got a job as an assistant editor in a cutting room, and I learned how to edit. And then I progressed to editing, being the chief editor on projects. And then finally, I decided that actually I wanted to direct, and made the jump into directing. So it was quite a long, slow process of building up my skills. And it's a big thing, directing films, and I think editing is a really good way of learning, how to shoot things and what you need, the kind of shots that you need in order to edit a good sequence and so forth. So I'd really recommend everybody to kind of at least have an understanding of editing. Even if you're a DOP, it's really good to know how things need to go together, because it really helps you shoot things in a good way. So yeah, it's been a long process. And then coming to Scotland, I was lucky enough to get Faction North managed to get commissioned to make From Scotland with Love, and that was back in 2014. And that was the year of the Commonwealth Games and the independence referendum. So it was a big year for Scotland, and I felt very privileged to be able to direct that film, which was made purely from archive footage with a music soundtrack by King Creosote. And even though I say it myself, it's been an incredibly successful film, because it keeps being screened. It's been screened on the BBC 10 times now. So,
Yeah.
And also we just did a new live tour of the film in March 2020, which was fabulous.
That was exactly what my next question was going to be, because From Scotland with Love, there's a lot of love in the department for that film, and it's so inspiring that there's, sometimes we're generating content, we're filming stuff, and there's enough filmed footage out there already. It's just about how we respond to it now. And I was going to ask you about creative collaborations now. How did that creative collaboration come about between you and envisioning this archive footage with a completely new musical score, and also just the logistics of having to dig into all that archive must have been unreal. So could you just talk us through the process for that film?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, the archive was, I can't remember where it was, but I know it was a train trip out from Glasgow. So we had to come from Edinburgh to Glasgow and then get on the train to go out to the archive. It was in a sort of industrial estate somewhere. It's now been moved to Kelvin Grove, right, in the city. So it's much more accessible for people. And me and my researcher, who was a recent graduate from the Edinburgh College of Art, and we went through probably, I don't know, 500 films or something. And sometimes we would only take one image from a film, but it was the key image that we really wanted. And basically I decided that I was going to have a thematic approach to the film rather than, chronological or geographical. So I decided on my big themes: love and loss, industry, work, play, migration, the war, the big themes of the 20th century in Scotland. And then I looked for archive images that would express those themes. And I really wanted to bring out particularly women's history, women's hidden history, because quite often women aren't at the front of history programs. So I wanted to, and I was also looking for images of diversity, which were hard to find, I have to say. But we put in what we could find. There's a whole job to be done to see if there is, lots of archive of all the diverse communities, particularly in Glasgow. So yeah, it was a real labor of love. And then we decided that King Creosote would be the perfect person to work with because of the way he writes songs. He writes songs that tell great stories, but they're not super obvious stories. They're kind of the quirky stories. And I just thought that would be a wonderful collaboration because I didn't want someone who would tell the same story in the songs as I was telling in the images. I needed someone to be going at an angle to the images so that the music would add a new dimension to the images rather than just telling the same story. So, and, King Creosote was really up for it and just, as you know, created some absolutely beautiful music and brought in lots of other musicians as well. And then we mixed in Chem 19 studio out in Blantyre. So the whole thing was a totally Scottish endeavour.
I'm just personally obsessed with people's process, so I'm going to ask another question about it. Is it fair to say then that the images led the music? Did you have like kind of sketch edits of sections that you were working with and you were sharing with him, or had you finished a complete edit and he responded to it? I'm always intrigued about the sound and image relationship.
It was very much a creative and iterative, back and forth, creative collaboration. Because, like, for example, I would find an image like the girls skipping in the streets, and then I would send that to King Creosote and say, this will definitely, I can't tell you exactly how it's the whole sequence will be, but I want a sequence in the film that has that energy of kids playing in the street, and the freedom that you feel from those kids of just, there wasn't so much traffic and so forth, so kids had a lot more freedom to play outside and things. And then he went to his grandmother's songbook and found the skipping rhyme, and then he adapted that skipping rhyme with his own twist to it. So it was very much. And then another example is the beach sequence. I found the image of the girls doing the jazz dance, the sort of Charleston on the beach, and I thought it was such a cool image, and such a, it really made you think, well, who are these kids? Where did they come from? And actually they were a group of school kids that were taken on a trip to the beach, and their teacher thought it was fun to have that dancing sequence. But you don't really need to know, it's just such a wonderful thing. So then I sent that to King Creosote, and that inspired him to create the jazz rhythm of the Larks song. So we really worked like that. And, sometimes obviously things that he would come up with would inspire me to edit the images in a certain way. So I would say that the images and the sound worked together so beautifully because we really did collaborate. We really did share our vision and try and work closely together, rather than me editing and then just handing over a finished sequence to him.
Can I ask a question, Virginia? From conception to completion, how long was that project? How long were you working on it for?
We started in June, I think, in 2013. We worked in the archive solidly June, July, August, and then beginning of September. Then we started editing, and then my researcher carried on finding stuff, because once you start editing, you realize, oh, we need such and such we didn't think we needed. So she carried on in the archive while we were editing for another sort of few weeks, I suppose. And we were really pretty much done by Christmas. I was working with a wonderful editor called Colin Money, who's a Glasgow-based editor. Obviously I'm from New Zealand, so he had a much better handle on Scottish history and geography than I did. So I was going for the big, broad strokes and so forth, but sometimes I'd kind of put an image somewhere rather inappropriate, so he would set me right on that. But he was wonderful. And then music supervisor David Macaulay, who's also I think he's also teaching.
Yes, I know David.
Yeah. Well, he was absolutely fantastic as the music supervisor. And it was his job to kind of make sure that we had, songs for every different sequence. And as you might know, if you've seen the film, there's not music over everything. We really wanted to have some space where there wasn't music, because otherwise it would have been too relentless. So he did the sound design for those, and all the sound design is created from scratch. We hardly used, I think we used about 3 pieces of sync in the whole film. I mean, part of the whole excitement of it was that we stripped away all the voiceover and music from, I mean, some of the images were silent, but when there was voiceover and music on them, we took that away, because we wanted to liberate the images so they could just speak for themselves, because quite often the voiceover was this plummy upper class voice kind of talking in a very patronizing way about Scottish people, and I didn't like that. So I wanted to kind of take that away and just let the images of people just breathe and bring a whole new soundtrack to the images. So that was our aim, and I think we managed to achieve that, thankfully.
And I think I seen on the website there's maybe in development from New Zealand with Love. Is that a possibility? That sounds quite exciting as well. If was archive footage something that came from you working with archive footage? I know it was a Commonwealth kind of project, but is that something you've always been passionate about, archive footage, or have you worked with that before?
Yeah, I mean, I directed a number of documentaries for Channel 4 television, and usually when you're doing documentaries for television, quite often you use archive in some shape or form. So I'd never done a film entirely from archive before, but for example, I made a film about some South African musicians called Songs from the Golden City, and I found amazing archive in South Africa of Black musicians performing in the townships and so forth. And again, we stripped away the commentary, because I mean, archive is all about like who is filming the archive for whom. And obviously in South Africa, it was white people filming the archive for quite often to demonstrate that Black people were inferior. So obviously we didn't want any of that voiceover. We took it away, and then some of the images were just so beautiful and they spoke for themselves. So that whole thing of like liberating the images from a context that sometimes is quite reactionary and giving it a new life is something which I feel passionate about. Yeah.
And that really comes across in the film. It's fantastic.
I mean, in terms of New Zealand, we don't know yet. It's quite complicated sometimes, because the beauty of the Scottish archive, and you should really take advantage of this, is that the Scottish archive owns a lot of the material that's in there. Quite often archives don't own the material, so it becomes a lot more difficult to track down who owns it and do the kind of deal, if you like, that we had to do in order to make From Scotland with Love possible, because archive footage can be really expensive. I mean, a lot of archives allow students to use archive, and I know the National Library of Scotland really encourage young people to come in and use the archive and play around with it and so forth. But obviously that's for educational use rather than commercial, commercial.
Yeah, you're right. Screen Scotland set you can be set up with an account and access the archive through Screen Scotland. They used to anyway, and that was a login, and you can go in and access all the kind of archive footage and use it as part of obviously student projects. We have had students do that in the past as well.
Yeah, no, there's some great stuff in there, and it's fun, because you've got ready footage there, and particularly if you're interested in editing and playing around with images and music, then there's a whole lot of footage in that archive that you can just play with and experiment and learn how to create little films. And I think they really encourage young people to do that. I think they've got a scheme that they run called Film Detectives, which is worth checking out. It's Emily, if you get in touch with Emily Munro at the archive, she's one of the outreach officers.
Yep.
They're really, I know that they want young people to be using the archive and experimenting. So, please do take advantage of that.
It's brilliant advice.
I would just add to that I think there's an editor that I work with on a thing called Doc Incubator, which is where we process films that are in rough cut and take them to the presentation point where they're launched into the marketplace. And these are very experienced editors who do the editing tutoring. And one of Audrey, her name is, Audrey says, the thing about documentary is that when you start to edit, actually everything is archive at that point, because everything has already been shot. So it's already all in the past. Even if you've shot it to appear to the audience as if it's happening now, actually it's all in the past. And one of the things that you really learn from going into something like the National Library of Scotland is the difference between the power of the image and the power of the sound with the image and the power of the sound on its own. So because you disaggregate everything, and it's a really great discipline to learn that images that were intended to mean a certain thing can be repositioned and recontextualized and re-edited to make a completely different meaning. And that's true of also of the material you shoot yourselves. You start with an intention. I want to film this person to make them look completely heroic, but you can actually edit that to make them seem completely non-heroic. So it's all about intention, and filmmaking, I think, is fundamentally about, you know, what is your intention? What are you trying to say? And that's a kind of cornerstone of, I think, what we do at Faction North. We make films that are not just kind of for entertainment. We try and give them some kind of meaning, broader or deeper meaning than that might be obvious to start with. Yeah. It's a political approach. And just to answer your question, how I got started in the industry, I was at university in London. I became very involved in political activism. I did that for about 10 years and got completely burned out. By then I'd met Virginia, and I decided I needed to recreate myself for something else. So I started in the film industry as a researcher, actually doing shot listing for independent television news, ITN News. So that's how I started to learn about the grammar of, you know, how news footage in this case is put together and how it's used to mean and give certain meanings to things. And then I progressed from being a researcher to being a producer, initially on a sort of entertainment show. But that I knew I didn't want to do that. And then slowly I learned that producing is all about learning a brand new language, which is a language that nobody ever teaches you. It's the language of finance. And it's about how do you use money to make an artistic project. And that is something that you learn the hard way. It's really tough. Very, very few people talk about it. It's, you know, it's like, oh, you just get the money from a broadcaster, or you just get the money from a film fund or something. It's never that easy, you know, and you have to learn how to do that. And to some degree, you have to learn the language of money and persuading people to give you money. And as Virginia alluded to, directing is you know, when you're a director, you are responsible for the spending of that money, you know, and that is a very heavy responsibility. And that's why it's difficult to become a director, because, you know, not everyone is cut out to do that. And you need a lot of practice, and you need a lot of thinking and a lot of training. So it takes a while. It's not just about, you know, inspiration and coming up with a good idea. You have to have a team of people around you who are going to execute your idea and make it real.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, like, no matter how experienced you are as a director, you know, each project is a huge challenge, and it's a really exciting challenge. It's incredibly exciting, because I think that if you can get a team together, camera, sound, art direction, and cast, along with all the other people, obviously creative producer, then, you know, it's, and everyone's working together to create your vision. It's the most exciting thing in the world. But it's also very nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if it doesn't work, and if it's, you know, if it turns out that your idea wasn't, you know, particularly, or it just didn't come to fruition, then everyone, the camera lens swivels to the director, and then basically it's basically down to you, kind of thing. Yeah. so you know, and it, you know, a lot of it's inspiration, but a lot of it is very, very meticulous planning, because you know, if you don't have things planned out, then if things go wrong, then you go awry pretty fast. So I mean, I know some directors are incredibly instinctive and they don't really plan much, but I think they're pretty rare. I think most directors are very kind of hardworking and really make sure they know what they're doing before they go on set.
Do you think that's why, you know, in terms of both yourselves having to work as a team around that is so important, it's so crucial? I mean, I was looking at I really like your website, and I like the how you're kind of presenting projects that you're working on. It's like ideas, you're kind of putting together stuff in advance. I mean, how far in advance are you working at the moment? I mean, what other things are you, you know, in terms of stuff in the pipeline? And I mean, you know, Grant, you've mentioned the thing about the finance. That's obviously a huge part of what you do, isn't it? And planning ahead for that, because you need to make this stuff work, the creative stuff work, and it's that push and pull, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we would work at least 6 months in advance of a shoot to raise the finance, probably more like a year actually, and sometimes even longer if you want to really fully finance a film. Certainly if you're gonna do drama, you have to fully finance the film because you need to raise all the money in advance. Documentary is a bit different. You can sort of live on the development money that you can raise either from broadcasters or film funds, and you can sort of roll forward the development from sort of tranche of money to the tranche of money as you hit certain goals and you hit certain kind of objects that you set yourself. But I think, you know, I think that the most difficult thing about filmmaking is that you have to be, on the one hand, you've got to be focused on your idea. And as a producer, I think the job of a producer is to protect the integrity of the idea from all sorts of influences, whether it's, you know, broadcasters or commissioning editors, film funding people. You know, everyone always has an idea about what you should be doing. And to some degree, the producer's job is to protect the director and the idea from all of that. Having said that, and it's difficult to explain this, and it's a complicated idea, but you also have to be open to new ideas, because your idea is going to change as well, because as you get into the project and as you get into the casting or you get into the development of the documentary, you realize that your original idea needs to change, or it has to change, or it might be changed through force of circumstance. You know, maybe somebody that you were going to film is suddenly no longer available because they don't want to be in the film, or they die, or, you know, whatever. Then you've got to react to that. So I think, yeah, it's always about having a clear plan, but being flexible enough to have a plan B and a plan C.
Yeah.
So you've got that. I think that's the job of the producer, is to sort of be looking down the road, and actually also looking to the moment where you launch the film. You know, which film festival are you going to aim at? You know, which broadcasters can you realistically bring on board? Where can you get this kind of money? You know, these are all questions that you've got to really think about, and it's about future planning. And I suppose that's in some ways I've got that kind of mind. You know, I'm always thinking 6 months to a year ahead, whereas I think directing is a different thing. You're more in the moment, you know, and then you've got to react to what's happening in front of you, whether it's the cast, whether it's a documentary. You know, you've got to be able to change. And I think that's where building a team over time is important, because you get to know each other's strengths and weaknesses. And you know, making a film is, I believe, a fundamentally collaborative experience. You cannot make a film on your own. If you think, you know, you are going to be the writer, the director, the producer, the editor, the DOP, good luck with that.
I noticed, although Virginia, I noticed that you do write and you do direct and you do edit. How helpful is having that overview of everything in terms of the creative process?
I think as a director, you have to have an overview of everything. I do write and direct. I don't edit anymore, sadly, because basically editing has become very technical, and you really have to keep up to date with all the software changes and so forth. And although I edit in my head, I actually have lost the skills of editing because I don't have time to kind of keep up with it. It's something that I actually regret, because you know, it's something I really enjoyed. On the other hand, I think as a director, particularly if you've written and directed something, it's really good to work with an editor who's, you know, who's objective and who's not kind of clinging on to your favorite moment. And if it hasn't worked out in the shooting, they can say to you, look, sorry, but this just doesn't work, and you've got to bite the bullet and face it, kind of thing. So I think, you know, although I wish that I still had that actual physical skill, if you like, I think it's actually beneficial to be working with somebody who's got that sort of separation from the project. And
I mean, now these days, it's extremely rare for financiers and broadcasters to agree to allow a director to edit their own material. That's really rare. I mean, maybe Martin Scorsese gets to do that, but well, he never edited anyway. It was always Thelma Schumacher, whatever her name is.
But anyway, I just thought, you know, because obviously many of you are sort of starting out, so I thought I'd tell a little story that's kind of maybe inspiring for. It's not such a, you know, big project. It's from Scotland with Love. I had some spare time, I think it was beginning of last year, because a project I wanted to make didn't happen for various reasons. And I didn't want to just, I always like to be doing something, so I didn't want to sit around doing nothing. So I teamed up with a fellow professor of mine from Sheffield Hallam. I'm a professor of film at Sheffield Hallam University, and I'm part of a research institute. And I teamed up with a design historian from that same institute who told me this wonderful story about these guys who make guitars from old cigar boxes. And it was very much about DIY, do it yourself, creating your own music, against the man, against the corporation, against, you know, democratizing production, etc., etc. And I just thought it was, you know, a really nice story. So we managed to get, I think in the end, we managed to raise £5,000, which is not so much. And I got together with an ex-student of mine who is brilliant DOP and editor, but he was kind of bored because he'd been doing a lot of corporate work and he wanted to do something creative. So there's a little team there. It was just me and him on a documentary project. And we managed to make this 20-minute film called 3 Chords and the Truth, with some help from Faction North, because obviously the company helped us covering insurance and those kind of things that are really important. So, but even so, it was incredibly low budget. And then we sent it along to a contact we have at the BBC, and he absolutely loved it. So the BBC then gave us some extra money to make a half-hour film from it, which is called Cigar Box Blues, The Makers of a Revolution. And it's now going to be screened on BBC4, I think on December the 18th. So
7:30, set your alarm.
Yeah, I've just seen that. So we'll put a link up on the forum, and we'll get them all to watch that.
So that's a story that might be inspiring, because it's sometimes it's about sort of spotting something that inspires you, you know, and you just think, wow, that's a great little story. You know, we're not going to make a huge, great feature film out of it, but we're going to make a really good short film that demonstrates the potential of the material. And then we can, you know, then you might need the help of somebody like a producer or somebody who's got contacts, you know, with the BBC or other broadcasters to send it in and try and sell the project in. But, you know, it was that little film that was almost like a throwaway project. It was something I did, you know, because a big project had fallen through and I was feeling a bit down in the dumps about it. And I just thought, you know, rather than feeling down in the dumps, let me do something creative. And it's, you know, so little throwaway project has turned into an actually incredibly successful little film. And
it was in a couple of film festivals
in
America, wasn't it?
The film itself has been in Nashville, in Albuquerque, and it got sort of, we sent it to some American festivals, and of course they loved it because they thought it was really quirky that these English guys were doing this Cigar Box Blues kind of guitar making, because obviously it comes from America. It comes, it's me.
Blues,
So
yeah.
they found it quite fascinating that these northern English guys mostly in these post-industrial towns are kind of creating this music and created this whole scene. So yeah,
but I think it's also
sorry.
interesting that just going back to my point about for us, filmmaking is often about an idea, a social idea, a political idea. Yes, it's a film about how to make a cigar box from old recycled rubbish, but really it's a film about how working class men, because they're all men in the film, no longer have manual jobs. They no longer have that tactile kind of making something in a factory. And because everyone now works in service industries and stuff like that, it's a different world. And somehow what that film is really about is a kind of throwback to a kind of former way of being a man in society, and having that sort of relationship to work and things you make and things that you make with your hands. And I think that's why the film works. It's like, yes, it's about something, but it's also about something bigger and broader. And it's that thing of making a film and finding the universal element in the material that means that everybody can relate to that material, even if they're not interested in music or making a guitar or whatever. People can sense there's something in that material that they can latch onto. And
huge amount of empathy, I suppose, isn't it? That's what you really want to kind of impart that on an audience. Come in, meet these people. These are an interest. This is I looked at the background of that, and I was just going to precisely ask that question, Virginia. How did that come about? But I find that social commentary side of things and looking at elements around that very interesting, and I think that's the key to where are the good stories now, especially in the context of what was happening with the UK politics. Yeah, you could probably gather that we're quite left of centre within the department, and we have an obligation of trying to impart some of that on the students. Right. And they kind of get that. I think it's quite important that your role as a filmmaker is to commentate, is to reflect what is actually going on, and documentary format is the place to do it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think, I'm not sure whether we've mentioned that my new project, I'm making what we're calling a hybrid documentary, i.e. a mix of documentary and fiction, about Mae West, who was a film star from the 1930s, very much known for her witty repartee and one-liners, etc. And she was she was known as the original blonde bombshell, because she was very sexually provocative and so forth, within the constraints of her corsets, etc. But what I've discovered about that story, which I didn't actually even know when I started on the project, was that she was incredibly engaged with both African American and drag culture in the 1920s in New York. And so I'm finding ways of really exploring that. And as I couldn't go back to New York to film as planned in May, I decided to have a look in Glasgow to see if I could find a young drag artist in Glasgow who might like to collaborate with me and devise a performance. So I found this wonderful young drag artist called CJ Banks, and I filmed her transforming from young man into Mae West and performing, and also filmed a couple of scenes from the play that Mae West wrote that starred drag artists, not actors playing drag artists, but actual drag artists that she cast in New York. So this whole project has taken on this incredibly diverse and political angle that I had no idea about when I started the project. And I'm finding it absolutely fascinating and really exciting. And it's just given a whole different dimension. So I'm looking at parallels between women's experience and the experience of gender diverse people, and the way in which, you know, we all experience you know, oppression and discrimination, and trying to sort of look at some of those similarities and differences and so forth, within the context of having a lot of fun with Mae West, as she was a great comedian, and you know, she used comedy to be very, very provocative around gender and so forth. So she's the perfect vehicle in a way for looking at some of these issues in a really fun, kind of wicked way.
I think there's also an interesting aspect of that as well, which is that, you know, when we first pitched that story to financiers to get some money, we had what we do is we create a kind of maybe an extended paragraph, or like 2 or 3 sentences that describe the film. And, you know, that's something that I really believe is very important, that you know, this is not a sort of sloppy kind of, you know, it might be a film about this. It's a real precise description. Every word is really carefully chosen to describe the film. So we had that created at the beginning of that process, and we pitched the film, and we managed to get some development money and moved it on. Then as the idea developed, we had to return to that sentence and that paragraph and completely change it. And so it's still a film, it's still a feature documentary, it's still a hybrid documentary about Mae West, but the actual, you know, positioning of it and what it is and what the content is and what we're selling and what we're trying to get people interested in has totally changed. It's a good example of what I was talking about earlier, where, you know, the team collaborate, and part of the producer's job, I believe, is to constantly be checking, you know, what is the film we're making now, you know, and is it still something that the financiers bought into back in the day? Do we have to go back to them and re-explain everything? Or, you know, it's this continual refining of the idea, and being, on the one hand, protecting the idea, but on the other hand, being brave enough to change it as things change.
And constantly being in communication with each other, and constantly checking in to see how that idea's evolved, and it is evolved in a way that it's taken us away from what it was, or is it grown to become these
one of the things you have to learn to do, Kim, is in a team, is you've got to learn how to be communicative. You also have to learn how to be didactic, in the sense that don't assume that what's going on in your head is understood by everybody else. In a way, you've got to kind of really lay out what it is you're trying to do. And that's also why the discipline of writing things down is also still really important, even in this digital age where everything just gets texted and everyone talks and everyone's on Zoom. At some point, you have to write down what your idea is, because you have to, you know, you will not get past a financier, you will not get past a broadcaster without written materials. Even if you've got material that shows what the film could be and it's sort of semi-edited and all that, you still have to write it down. And the reason for that is that it is a discipline. It's forcing you to really ask, what is it I'm doing?
Fantastic.
I think it's really important to sort of stop and reflect about, you know, what actually is, you know, what are you really interested in exploring in film, and, you know, what's your passion, and what can you bring to a subject that's quite unique, because people are always looking for the next original thing, the next unique idea, etc. And we all know that most ideas have sort of been done before, but somehow you have to come up with a new way of looking at it. And as young people, then you know, you have got a unique vision on the world. You know, you've got a different way of looking at the world than someone like me. And so, you know, it's like really owning that and really thinking, okay, I've got something, you know, to say about that I really feel passionate about. And I think, you know, people need to watch, listen to, hear, see. And that's where, I mean, I think you were talking about genre, Kim,
Mhm.
earlier, because although I've been recently doing quite a lot of documentary, I've also done quite a few short films, and some of them, I'm very interested in genre and how you can use genre to tell, but again, tell sort of political stories. Not, I don't mean sort of political with a big P, I just mean, you know, sort of really exploring ideas that are interesting.
And that's what I
But
wanted to ask about
I
your
think
right.
the danger with genre is that you just end up copying sort of tried and true cliches, and that doesn't usually go down particularly well with funders. So if you are interested in genre like horror or thriller, then you do need to think about, you know, how can I make this original? How can I really make this something that actually is going to catch the zeitgeist, or whatever you'd call it, you know, catch the moment, if you like. And I think, you know, something like horror can be used in a really interesting way, as can thrillers. You know, if you think of a thriller like Chinatown, you know, that has an incredible story to tell about corruption, or LA Confidential, you know, those kind of thrillers are really, you know, they've really got something to say about the world. And, you know, I think it would be great if people could, you know, be making those kind of films in Scotland.
Is that how you approach your written film? When you start to write something, Virginia, do you see genre as a vehicle to subvert and also to get across issues and things that you want to talk about, and then you use genre to what is your writing process? Because we spoke a lot about documentary and being open to ideas and things that are out there, but when you write, when you start to write, is that a collaborative process, or is that the one time when you're doing that kind of on your own? Or talk us through that, please, if you can.
I mean, I think it's I've been very interested in trying to use genre. I think it's really difficult because I think people have certain expectations about a genre film. It's something, for example, I don't know whether you know a director called Jane Campion. She's actually I don't know whether she'd class herself as New Zealand or Australian. She was born in New Zealand. So she made a film called The Piano, which was hugely successful, and quite a number of other films. And then she made a film called In the Cut, which was a kind of genre film, but it was a genre film that wasn't, she was trying to subvert the genre to the point where I don't think it's actually that successful. So it's quite a tricky line to tread, I think. And, you know, it's something I keep trying to do, and I'm not sure that I've been totally successful in it yet, to be absolutely honest. But the reason I think it's important, and quite often, you know, women directors in general don't work in genre, which is quite an interesting thing to think about. Why is that? I mean, someone like Catherine Bigelow, obviously, you know, is a huge genre director, but there's not that many of them.
She's the only one.
She's pretty much the only one. And I find it quite frustrating. And I think there's a bit of a, I personally think that there's a bit of a bias against genre in the sort of independent funding regimes, which I think is a real shame, actually, because I really think that, you know, the thing about genre is that people love it, and, you know, people love thrillers, they love horror, they love, you know, action films, you know, so there's a way of actually smuggling politics into the mainstream through genre. That's my main attraction to it. But I think it's actually quite difficult to pull off, and it shouldn't be so hard. I think there should be much more openness towards experimenting with it amongst the funders, but that's my personal
I see there's some questions, Kim, in the dialogue box. Do you want to try and address
shall we address some of these questions, Kim?
Yep. You want to go ahead with it, Alan? Can you see it?
So someone's asked, Sean Gray has asked, what inspired you to make a documentary about the Wall of Death? I wasn't inspired originally. It was the Irish producer. The Irish producer is the lead producer in this project. So it's a co-production, but like most co-productions, one party is like more important than the other. They have more, they're bringing more money to the table, and they probably initiated the project as it was in this case. And actually, the producer of the documentary was originally the producer of the feature film I mentioned called Eat the Peach. So I think there's a kind of nice circularity about that, which is also suggested in the title of being full circle. So that was, and I just got inspired by the Scottish angle on it, which was the Scottish artist and his obsession with the Wall of Death. Most favorite piece of work you have made and why? That's a difficult one. I'll have to come back to that. Upcoming projects, will there be ways for us to watch the materials? Not really. I mean, I would say one of the things you've got to be very careful about is sharing your material before it's really ready to be shared, so that you're really confident about what you're trying to do and say with it. And also projects get old very quick. You know, like when you're pitching out into the marketplace and you're trying to get money and you're trying to get the project in and you're trying to get the project when it's finished into film festivals, you have about a sort of 12-month, you know, gap, because that's the cycle of production that year and that's the cycle of distribution. So you don't want your project to be out there for too long, getting old. So I think you've got to hold back from the temptation to sort of show the world before the world is ready. Someone called iPad has said, I would like to work in surf documentary and surf film in general. What do you recommend? Okay, so I have actually made a documentary about surfing in the past. It's called In Search of the Cat. It was a documentary about Mickey Dora, who was one of the original sort of surf rebels in the 50s in America. By surf documentary, I guess you are referring to maybe big wave surfing, or I'm not really sure what you're referring to.
I think it's from one of our students. I'm presuming it's from.
That's Jono. So Jono's a surfer. He's Spanish, and he is a surfer. So he's
okay. That's really important that you're a surfer to start with, because it's very, you know, you need those specialist skills. If you're in big wave, if you're trying to do big wave surfing, you need specialist safety teams. You need to be towed onto the waves, all of that kind of thing. Yeah, it's a specialist skill, and it's something you're going to have to specialize in. You need specialist underwater cameras, all that kind of thing. But there are quite a lot of documentaries you can watch. And in fact, there's a very good surf documentary, which is a portrait of a town in Ireland where they do big wave surfing on the West Coast. It's by a documentary director called Ross Whitaker. And it's a beautiful documentary about the surfing community there. So I very much recommend you watch that.
I mean, that's the thing, you know, it's really important to try and watch what's been out there already, because there's no point, in some ways, there's no point doing the same thing. Did you say that the director's Spanish?
Jonah, and he's one of our students at HNC. He's Spanish, and he's made a short documentary at Coldigan Bay, which I've seen is really good.
Great.
Okay, so, you know, just again, think about, you know, what is it that you have that that you could bring to the subject that's original, that's unique, that's a different angle on the surf documentary, because there are a lot of them out there, and you know, it's a fascinating world, and there's a big audience. That's the other thing, thinking about audience, actually, because obviously, you know, if you could, you know, these days, you know, it used to be that you'd make the film and it would go out into cinemas or on television or whatever, and it would hit the audience for the first time. But now, because of online, there's a way of building an audience sort of in a way as you're making things. So, you know, you've got a fantastic audience there of surfers and people who are interested in surfing, but they want to see something different that they haven't seen 100 times before. So that's really the key to it, I think. And, you know, like maybe we're not so familiar with surfing in Spain, for example, or, you know, there's or a connection between Scotland and Spain in terms of surfers, or I don't know what it would be, but, you know, something that's kind of gives it a really unique twist would be really good.
I would say that most of the surfing films I've ever seen are about men and young boys and men who are surfers. I think there's a whole world of female surfing that's probably largely unexplored. And that's kind of, you know, I think you've always got to try and think about what has not been done, you know, because there is a body of work called surf films, and, you know, there's a big audience for that, but you've got to think about, well, what's the angle? What's my angle? And that's the same answer I would think to Brad's question. I want to be a documentary filmmaker. What's the one thing I can start doing today that would benefit me in the long term? I would say, actually, it's put the camera down and think about, what is it that you think about the world that you want to tell us? What's your particular point of view on the world? And start with that, because that's what you can bring, which is completely unique to you. Everything else is out there, it's been done, but you can bring a uniqueness. But you've got to really think about that. And, you know, that's not going to come to you by, you know, just starting filming. You know, you've got to think, read poetry, read politics, you know, read ancient Greek philosophy and stuff, you know, literally think about the world, because documentaries are, you know, they're a version of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, what are you saying about it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. Believe me, I do. Excellent. I'm glad to see people are reading ancient Greek poetry. That's excellent.
That's great advice. That's brilliant advice.
Any other questions? I think
Graham had a question, and that's something I thought about as well. See, when Virginia, when you went to the archive, was a lot of the material been digitized, or did you have to go in and dig into the old reels?
Okay, so that's a really good question in terms of archive, because we didn't really have the resources to dig into the old reels. So yeah, pretty much everything that we had in the film had been digitized, but that didn't mean to say it had been seen before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think subsequent to From Scotland with Love having been made, I quite often see little snippets of sequences in other films, because people can be quite lazy about looking for archive, you know, because and then you just see the same shots kind of turning up in documentary after documentary. And we did try and kind of, there's some things that we used that we knew had been used quite a lot before, like the shipbuilding sequence, because it's so cinematic and it's so, you know, powerful. But we did try and find stuff that hadn't been, you know, used too much before. And of course, it's always the way in which you put things together anyway, and the meaning that you give to it. So, you know, even if you are using things that have appeared in documentaries before. But I mean, the whole question of sort of digitizing material is a big one for for archives. I mean, you know, they need the funding to do it, basically, and the time and the resources to do it. And it's a great shame that, you know, there's probably stacks of wonderful material that just hasn't been digitized yet. And you know, but looking through that is just hugely time consuming and so forth. So, you know, as all that, as they are slowly, you know, obviously working through and digitizing more and more stuff. So, you know, there's plenty more documentaries to be made using the archive from the moving image Scottish moving image archive, for sure. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Listen, Virginia and Grant, thanks for coming along. I'm conscious now we've taken up an hour of your life that you might not get back again.
No,
so
it's a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for coming back to us and agreeing to speak to the students. There's some really great advice and really fascinating kind of insight into you know, the process and how you work as a team within the company. Kim, you want to say anything?
No, I just feel totally inspired now. Every time I just feel like I want to run out and make a film. That's it. Obviously, I need to plan ahead. No, I've just really enjoyed speaking to both of you and learning more about the work that you do. And I think we'll all be tuning in. When is it? December the 17th, did you say?
18th. December 18th, 7:30, BBC 4.
So December 18th, 7:30. Okay, we'll all be there.
It's a really fun. It's a fun film, and there's even one of my female colleagues from work ends up making her own cigar box guitar, breaking into the.
Everyone can do it, folks.
Yeah, and a young boy as well. So we managed to get a little bit of diversity into the workshop.
It's so visual, isn't it? To be making with your hands and so visual to watch. So it's, I'm really looking forward to it.
And they're really good. They're really good musicians as well. They're just fun. Fun, fun bunch of people. It's it was an absolute joy and pleasure to make. So yeah, I think you'll enjoy it. Yeah.
It'll be a highlight of Christmas, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming along.
Good luck with it all for everyone. And
good luck.
Anything we can do in the future, do let us know.
Just follow your dreams and your inspiration.
Plan ahead.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Take care.